It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstein Network, the show where we look at the dollars and nonsense of the sports media, industrial, business complex in all of its sprawling glory. Steve, how you doing today?
Outstanding, man. Very good. We had a week of rain down here in Texas, and so it's, and when you talk about rain in Houston, Texas, it means flooding. So I've seen like flash flood warnings every day, tornado warnings, and all that. And so it looks like today is going to be more of the same, probably. So that bothers me. But other than that, I'm doing fine.
Got a lot to talk about this week. As always, whenever the sports business landscape is maybe just a little dry, Daniel Snyder and his antics always give us something to lead a.
We can always count on him for hashtag content.
That's right. Yeah. So we slot him in as a lead. If he doesn't give us anything, we'll move on. But we hold space for him.
Yeah. Thank God for Dan Snyder. My goodness. He doesn't even know what, the hours of entertainment he's provided us.
So we'll start with his continuing divorce litigation against Bruce Allen and vice versa as their, ex-lovers quarrel spills out into all kinds of lawsuits and depositions and whatnot.
You just gave me an image in my head that just is something that's never going to go away.
Well, I try to do that once a show. So Steve, what exactly? So we haven't heard much from Bruce Allen, but he seems to be punching back a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So, first of all, the story where you can read the latest is by Daniel Kaplan with The Athletic. Ex-Washington football team exec Bruce Allen responds to Dan Snyder in legal filing. Now, we all know the basic background here, but in case you've been living under a rock, Dan Snyder sued this Indian lawsuit called Meow, based out of India, last year at this point, because they ran a story alleging that Snyder had ties to Jeffrey Epstein. And Snyder has gone nuclear on everybody over it. The lawsuit is filed in India, but he's filed a whole bunch of related and linked discovery lawsuits all around the country. The basic gist of it is Snyder thinks that his former partners, who are the minority shareholders in the Redskins, one of them was responsible for the leaks. And there was a guy named Moog who was the quote broker, close quote, who was sort of in charge of marketing and selling the shares. And Snyder settled with all of them a while ago and obviously he bought back the shares. So as a part of that, one of the discovery lawsuits was about Bruce Allen. And so in the media, I believe it was The Athletic, as a matter of fact, maybe, but multiple sources in the media reported that Bruce Allen had an enormous amount of conversations with Moog over the last year, like 20 hours of conversations, which is a lot. I mean, who are you talking to besides a spouse for 20 hours? And some of you aren't talking to your spouse for 20 hours, over the course of a year. And so Snyder thinks that, obviously thinks that Bruce Allen is leaking some of this stuff to the Indian lawsuit. Now, the interesting thing that came out about this particular Athletic story is now we know, which we didn't know before, that there was a grievance filed by Allen against Snyder. Now, we all know that Snyder fired Allen, a year ago, more than a year ago now. But we didn't know there was a grievance. And the grievance was about Allen trying to apparently get the remaining portion of his contract, some portion of his contract paid. And so what that tells me is that Snyder, when he fired Allen, alleged that Allen breached his contract. And therefore his remedy was to withhold all or some portion of the money that he otherwise would have been due. And then Allen disagreed with that. The NFL you can't just file a lawsuit. in this. The NFL requires that these are done by confidential grievance procedures in order to keep the NFL's dirty laundry out of the public eye, which is exactly what happened. So, in this discovery lawsuit that Snyder filed in conjunction with the Indian lawsuit to get Bruce Allen to cough up documents and other things, Allen puts in a filing in the public record that Snyder did all this and that he, Allen, won the lawsuit and got his money. Snyder's attorneys responded and said, no, you didn't win. There was a confidential settlement, which you just breached. And so there's a lot more bad blood between Snyder and Allen than we ever thought. I cannot wait for the day that Bruce Allen is testifying somewhere. I don't know if I need to hire like G. Gordon Liddy to break in, Watergate style, but I'm going to be there when Bruce Allen goes on the record. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, yes, if they pay-per-viewed that, I think you'd have a good audience for sure. I think it really is interesting about how he tried to cut his money. I also liked in the same Athletic article how Allen in the account, claims that he used COVID-19 as a cover of like losses due to COVID-19 as one of the reasons to not pay him out. I just sort of chuckled at that. It's one of those things too where Snyder just makes so many of his own problems. Like, just pay him his money, right? He opens himself to so much risk with so many of his actions. You said earlier that all these other lawsuits. I think we're up to 12 now, U.S. based lawsuits with all these discoveries and
it's
whatnot.
In that neighborhood, at least.
Yeah. So if you just paid Allen his go away money or what you owed him, technically, right?
Well, we don't know what he owed him. Let's
Right.
just say, Snyder may have been right. The contract is not public.
Right, but you at least you open yourself up to someone who's angry and going to countersue for their money, right? There's so where you could probably just put one. You probably keep him a little quieter if you just pay off what you owe him or whatever. So, but he just continually opens himself up for counterpunches.
Yeah, he can't help himself. This is called being petty and vindictive. Is what this is. You're absolutely right. You did the good thing. You helped your team dramatically by getting rid of a totally useless executive. And he could have gone away and you would never have to thought about him again if you just forked over another few $1 million, which you have. This is not like this money's going to make or break you. And I realize it was a bad year for everybody, because of the COVID stuff. But I highly doubt. See, I highly doubt that COVID is a valid excuse for not paying Allen his money. Now, a lot of contracts have clauses in them that says, especially when you're talking about like real property and leases and stuff and like performance contracts, they'll have clauses in there that are called force majeure clauses that say, if there's a war or if there's a massive hurricane or Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, has to go fight an earthquake and, fly a helicopter into San Francisco and rescue people. If that stuff happens, then this contract can't proceed, and then it's King's X, and, nobody pays anybody. That's a common feature in a lot of contracts, but I highly doubt it's in an employment contract. I just highly doubt that that's in there, that there's a force majeure clause in an employment contract like that. So I suspect that there was probably no basis for it, and I mean, it's not surprising, I guess, to me that ultimately Allen or Snyder settled. And so Chris is right. What happened here? He could have paid him this money in the first place. And did you save yourself $1 million or two? Yeah, probably. But you're also now paying a ton of attorney's fees. You went through a grievance procedure. Like I said, I think I said this on the last show. Either that or the Hogsty. Dan Snyder needs something to do. Part of this is that he doesn't have anything to do because all the businesses that he's been in, he's gotten driven out of them. He was in Johnny Rockets, that failed. He got run out of Six Flags. He was in bed with Tom Cruise and Paramount, and that's over. And I really think that Snyder just doesn't have a lot of major outside business interests. I mean, I'm sure he has investments, but like a lot of these NFL owners have a lot of other business entities. Like the NFL team I worked for, the owner had major other things he was working on and was never at the team because he was doing other things. Dan Snyder doesn't have that. And so I think he has the time to get involved in these things, and he's just a very petty individual. I mean, so is Bruce Allen. But a lot of pain and agony could have definitely been avoided. But I think the root of the concern about the Moog stuff is valid. What are you doing talking to somebody for 20 hours? And you're talking to that somebody who happens to be in the middle of a huge dispute with minority shareholders. I think there's something to that that Bruce is probably hiding.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, no, he was angry, and so he was lashing out and leveraging, what he claims is a 20-year friendship with Moog.
I've known
Probably.
people for 20 years that I don't talk to for 20 hours.
No, for sure. But I just like how he's starting to establish, oh, we've been bros since, back in the day, they're starting to kind of come out. This Moog guy, I mean, that's the one. I mean, for the real dirt, that's the guy you'd love to see really be forced to spill the beans. I mean, he really is the center of all this.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, he definitely is. He's in the middle of, the sale that just closed. He's got yeah, I definitely think he's the guy you start with. Just the sad thing is we're probably never gonna see this because the odds of this thing getting to a courtroom near us are slim and none. Because again, remember that the original lawsuit is filed in India. So even if Moog is somehow forced to testify, which I can't imagine there's a mechanism to allow that, we would never see it. And I don't know how you subpoena an American citizen to a courtroom in India. I don't know what the status of Indian law is, but I do know that we're not going to extradite somebody to India because of a civil lawsuit. So we probably will never see all of this. Will probably always remain confidential, which is unfortunate. At the most, they may depose him, and if they do, the transcript isn't public. So a lot of this we will probably never see. And that's a real shame because if Dan was smart, let's start a documentary. Hopefully, he's filming this stuff, and we can have an ESPN 60 for 60.
Yeah.
On the Dan Snyder, Jeffrey Epstein, Bruce Allen, Jim Moog trial. That would be, appointment viewing, I think. But that's the latest in it. And I just shake my head at how much money Dan Snyder's spending on this. I mean, has there ever been a more expensive lawsuit? If you put this lawsuit in a United States courtroom, it would still be very expensive. But this dude has lawyers going to India, and he's got local counsel in New Delhi, and he's got 12 separate lawsuits in 12 separate jurisdictions about discovery. I mean, it's an enormous number of fees. He's got to be up in into the 8 figures now for legal fees. I have to think he is.
And part of me is like, the crux of this was the rumors about Epstein and drug fueled parties at in Ashburn and stuff. All of that was almost no one believed. There was no credible evidence. For someone who people love to stick nefarious actions to, like Snyder, none of them stuck. Right? Like they didn't. Like everyone realized. I mean, for the first time ever, I actually went to this meow.com site. I mean, it's just a sewage line of nonsense. So so no one even believed this. It actually, I'd argue, helped them because the actual article, remember the sexual harassment, all that stuff, seemed, this isn't my belief or I think the reality, but seemed tame in comparison because you had all of this crazy rumors. So when the reality came out, wasn't nearly as salacious, from a headline standpoint. So it actually probably benefited him in the long run. No one believed it. So why are you going after to this degree? It didn't even harm you, And yes, there are rumors on the internet. It's 2021.
No, I think you're absolutely right. There is no basis in reality or fact whatsoever. Nobody thought for all of Dan Snyder, for all of his faults, nobody thought he was involved in Epstein. He's not on any of the flight logs of Epstein's airplane, because we know who was on those, and Dan Snyder had one of them. There's no photographs, like Prince Andrew style photographs of some 16-year-old disgustingly sitting on his lap, nothing like that. So nobody took it seriously. I think you're 100% right in saying that it probably helped him because it was a distraction. And sure, I think, you make a big point of writing him a letter and making it public saying you got to get rid of this or we're going to sue you and all that. But going to this, intercontinental lawsuits, I mean, man, again, I think this, Chris, it comes down to Dan Snyder needs something to do. If you were the CEO of Apple, I don't think you would have time for this because it's taken a ton of time, doing this. I just don't think that someone, a business executive who has a full-time career would want to mess with this. Like you said, it's a total garbage website. It is utter and complete trash. Nobody in the United States takes it seriously at all, and he shouldn't either. And that he's spending this much time and money on it, it's just crazy. And it's sort of, I'm not trying to get political here, but the analogy to this to me is Donald Trump can't let the election go. He's, the dude bought into every crazy conspiracy theory possible, and clearly is sitting around Trump Tower, wherever he is, reading this stuff 24 hours a day. And I think that's sort of what the boat that Dan Snyder has been in with this lawsuit. He didn't have enough to do. And so he's thinking about this lawsuit all the time. The other Dan Snyder news that came out, TMZ, the American sleazy gossip rag, caught Snyder on the sidewalk in front of a stadium. And I don't know where they were. Was it SoFi in LA, Chris? Do you know?
Yeah, I'll look it up.
Okay. But they caught him on the sidewalk, and amazingly enough, Dan Snyder talked to him, and he and Jason Wright were there looking at stadiums. And this is the first time Snyder's talked to the media since that famous, Happy Thanksgiving, press conference a couple years ago when it was really Christmas time or New Year's, whatever it was. And so they asked him about the stadium, and he didn't really say much except to say they're looking into it, and, it's going to be state of the art, and it could be in Maryland, D.C., or Virginia. The one thing I think you take out of that little mini presser was that he didn't even attempt to threaten to move the team anywhere, which is good news for Redskins fans, because that's normally the leverage point that owners use is, hey, if you don't build our stadium, we'll move to San Antonio or wherever. And he didn't do that.
It was SoFi, which makes total sense. I mean, it's the crown jewel now of NFL stadiums. I'm sure everyone's toured it and yada yada. I think they're on like 8 primetime games or something this season.
Yeah. Now, I'm sorry, because one other thing with all this is that the update to the stadium is that the lease expires in 2027. And he mentioned this in the little mini presser there with the TMC photographer or a videographer. And so they're it's not crisis time, but we're at the point here where the stuff needs to start happening in the next year or two, or they will run out of time. They need to get the site nailed down. And if they can do that, the rest of it can kind of fall in line. But you cannot just build stadium in a year. That is not the way it works. It is very complicated. Trust me, I have been there. It is very complicated, especially when you're talking about public funding, and they can't just do it. And so in a year. And so they really do need, it's coming down to the point where in the next year or two, they have to nail down the site.
I think it's super fascinating. TMZ breaks as much sports stories nowadays than anybody else, strangely enough. And I think you're totally right. I mean, we rarely see Snyder, and the Happy Thanksgiving one. He had to be at that press conference because he's introducing a new coach, and they didn't have there's no Bruce Allen, who had been the mouthpiece for the organization pretty much the entire time he was there, up to and including going to league meetings and stuff like that. So that one he couldn't hide from. So It was really fascinating to see someone actually, we just don't see this. It's like seeing a rare bird or something. I mean, and I
It's
wonder
like
how,
the peacock walks up into your front yard.
yeah, I wonder too, though, that makes me think, was it a plant? So they're going to be doing something obvious, right? Oh, we're going to go check out the new crown jewel of the NFL stadiums. He's got Jason Wright there, right? So you got that kind of buffer a little bit. Oh, new face, all that new energy. It's, newsflash, people. 3/4 of the things you see on those gotcha TMZ sidewalk things, they're tips. We're going to be at. Come see us here. Like I know they do all that guerrilla stuff and that's part of their, but most of those are
They're not just
plants.
running into Matthew McConaughey by accident or
Right. Yeah.
whoever.
There's a publicist or something behind that, setting those things up. So it does make, and it was fairly benign, right? It was like it was, kind of put him in good, decent light or normal light, doing normal activities. So I wonder, but it wasn't like it was outside of the Washington D.C. media. It wasn't like J.P. Finley or John Keim like peppering him at a press conference. It was halfway, well, no, full way across the country. I do wonder if this was a staged job.
That's a good thought. I hadn't thought about that, and I don't think Snyder's really smart enough to do that, but Jason Wright is.
Yeah.
He's very savvy. And he was there, and TMZ caught some comments by him, and it appeared as though there was more that Wright said. I think that just didn't make the clip. It kind of seemed to me it was an edited clip. So that's an interesting thought. That's possible because I thought if you watch it, Snyder looked relaxed.
Yeah.
He was comfortable. You don't see Dan Snyder in that light because the Ron Rivera press conference, he looked like he was a third grader having to make a speech in front of his class, and he was terrified, like you are when you're that age. That's what that presser looked like. He was very stiff. This time, he wasn't wearing a suit. You notice
polo,
that? He was,
yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's possible that maybe Jason said, hey, we can get some positive, press out there for you, and it's in L.A. like you said. I mean, good point to say that John Keim in there or whoever, it's just some TMZ guy, and a lot of these TMZ guys aren't even TMZ employees; they're just
freelancers.
yeah, and they're selling it to TMZ, and so it's really easy to get one of those guys out there. And Jason, guarantee you, has a contact that has a contact at least, that can do that. So that's an interesting thought. I mean, what's the purpose of it? The purpose of that would be to just paint Dan in a little bit better light, because you gotta. I mean, he got some positive press by grabbing the Stones a year ago and firing Bruce Allen, or a year and a half ago, I guess now. That's good. But then all this trash has come out. I tell you what, if I were Snyder's advisors, I would tell him to drop the whole thing. Cut your losses, drop the whole. You're not going to get any money out of any of these people. Even if you got a verdict, you're going to get a verdict out of an Indian courtroom. So how do you domesticate a judgment from India? I've never done it. There's probably a process. But then you're going to have to go collect on it. And guys who have tens of millions of dollars in their bank account don't just pay verdict judgments very easily. And you're going to be fighting about this for years. Realistically, years. I don't know why he'd want to do it. He's made his point. If the point was to say, hey, I was not involved in Jeffrey Epstein's nonsense and grossness, I understand that, but he's made the point to the public already. And what are you going to do? Take the Meow website and run it yourself? I mean, I don't really understand. He's going to own Meow. Congratulations. You're going to be the TMZ of India now. I don't really understand why he's even doing all this.
Especially when you really, especially if we think this was somewhat coordinated, it's a bit there. He's in a process of potentially going through somewhat of a reputational wash. He's consolidated his power, right? So he's locked in that as sole or family sole owner of the team. However you think about the name, it's not an issue. Everything's forward looking there. Everyone respects the both front office, coaching, all of the leadership culture change seems to be working. the football stuff is, they're solidly entrenched in positive mediocrity. So I think to some degree, all the efforts, and I think you can kind of see Jason Wright trying here, should just be about reputational rehab, which means cutting all that stuff out.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And like I said, the part of the reputational rehab would be dropping the vindictive multi-continental lawsuit and just let Bruce Allen go live on the beach. Just forget about him. You got rid of your minority partners. Stop trying to depose them and just let it go. Because again, I mean, you've made the point known. I was not involved with Jeffrey Epstein. Everybody believes you. Nobody thinks you were involved with Jeffrey Epstein. Nobody thinks you're a child predator at all. So there's really no point to it all. This was the first positive press Dan Snyder has gotten in years. In front of the camera, I'm talking about. It's because every interview he does goes badly. He did an interview with 60 Minutes or something. Maybe one. Don't quote me on 60 Minutes, but a news media network 6 or 7 years ago, at least, and he came across again as very stiff and didn't present well in front of the camera and all of that. But when you catch him on a possibly staged thing in a polo on a sidewalk in L.A., it's just different. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think as a part of washing himself out of the past, I think would be just stop all the nonsense. Go get on your yacht and sail around the Caribbean or wherever it is you go, and just live your life, win your money.
Yeah, no. So there you go, Snyder. Advice from Steve and Chris. Although,
because I know you're listening,
if you're a fan of football team, we probably should root for him to continue to be in useless lawsuits because it does give him something to do that doesn't concentrate on the team.
Well, yeah. What he needs to do is go find another investment somewhere.
Yeah.
That's what, to entertain himself. Because if there's one thing we've proven, it's that every time Dan Snyder touches any on-the-field product, it automatically turns to stone. Like Medusa raises her head and turns you to stone when you look at her. That's when Dan Snyder looks at football, the football team turns to stone. Yeah. Dan Snyder is Medusa. Okay? And if you don't know the reference, go look it up. So we need to keep him doing other things as long as possible. And the stadium thing is a perfect thing. Focus on that for a while. Build yourself a palace to excess on the shores of the Potomac somewhere and just stay out of football. And I think Jason Wright probably knows that and is trying desperately to do that.
Right. And it shows a sign of proactivity to the fans that, even if there's no real news in terms of the stadium, and yes, there are kind of screeching towards some deadlines, it shows that, he cares, they're working on it, there's energy there, even if it really means nothing and it just means they went and saw a new stadium. But it signals a different kind of energy, which I think is what the goals are,
Yeah.
should be the goals.
Yeah. No, you're right. I agree. So that's the latest.
I'm sure we'll have something in 2 weeks.
News. Yeah. There's always something.
Yeah, that the sexual harassment investigation is still out there. That second shoe is not dropped yet.
I'm amazed, to be honest, that didn't go away. I really am. I really thought that his attorneys would have figured out a way to wrap that up too and just move on. That's sort of the one thing left with Dan that needs to go away is that. So, just let her file her report and be done. The NFL finds him and it's over. That's what needs to happen with it. Just take your lump and move on.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we're going to move to, it is nearing, not officially summer, but I think, people are transitioning into summer in all those ways. And traditionally, summer's meant baseball. And we got kind of just a weird confluence of baseball-related stories that all popped up this week. Most of them having to do kind of with the future and the soul of the game. I'm sure everyone who's even got like half an eye on a sports information crawler on the web or TV saw that Tony La Russa hubbub that came up this week, which kind of, reignited the old school, new school baseball debates. But we also saw, we're at 6 and kind of 6.5 if you kind of count one of the other no hitters, which I think technically didn't count because it was only 7 innings or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of discussion and debate about, is baseball watchable? Are this many strikeouts, no hitters, just a dominance of pitching, and probably a swing or bust mentality of hitters? Is it having effect on the product of baseball? And is that going to be a problem long term? Now, Steve, you're way more into baseball than me, so I just love your take on the watchability or how you feel about that, and then we can go into about what the implications are.
Yeah. Now, the best place to read about this, Chris found this story. Tim Kirchin, who is one of ESPN's leading baseball analysts, wrote a long form column about this from May 19th called "How the K Became the Most Destructive Letter in Major League Baseball." I got to be honest, when you sent me this story, my initial thought was that this is just old men shaking their fist in the wind, a little bit. But the more you think about it, really, here's the crux of the argument. There have been a massive uptick in strikeouts in recent years, and this no hitter phenomenon is a subset of it. There's been a lot of no hitters. So the problem is that if there's not a lot of action because everybody's striking out in these games, the fans won't watch. The real baseball guys who find pitching fascinating, like me, will watch. But you're not growing the younger generation of fans if the game is boring and guys get up there and flail away at 6 pitches. 2 of them are balls. 3 of them are balls. 3 of them are strikes, and he sits down, and then the pitcher strikes out 15. Someone argued that's much less entertaining than having a game where, guys are putting the ball in play and, running bases and all of that. So that's the fear, is ultimately you're not growing the next generation of fans by having all these strikeouts. Now, the article talks about the reason why, and so I kind of changed my tune. My initial thought was wrong. It's not just old men screaming at the wind, because what they're saying here is that the batters nowadays are just focused on home runs, and so it's home run or bust. And so they're adjusting their swing, because you can have different types of swings. You can swing for power. You can swing for contact. Like Tony Gwynn, if you remember him, he cited in this article, quoted, Tony Gwynn wasn't a power hitter. He was the ultimate singles hitter, maybe the best in the history of the game, probably. He could place the ball. He rarely missed, swung and miss. By baseball, everybody swings and misses, but by baseball standards. And it was a different way to play the game. If you watch the World Series last year, the Dodgers hit a ton of home runs in the playoffs, a ton of the World Series champs, my Dodgers, ton of home runs, but they're not really playing, quote, baseball in the traditional way, which is hit for contact. Like if you play Little League Baseball, the coaches will always say, just put the ball in play, and it just swing at the ball and put it in play, because you never know what may happen. And baseball teams just don't play that way anymore. Hitters don't play anymore. They cite analytics in here as a bad thing, which I'm fully on board with this, saying that batters are so focused on the data about the data on these pitches, because there's an enormous amount of data, spin rate, and how far pitches drop and not drop, and instead of focusing on just figuring out how to hit, realizing you need more than one swing, you can't always Jock Peterson style swing at every single pitch like you're trying to hit a home run. And so what these old guys, like to cite Reggie Jackson and a bunch of other, what's his name? Zimmerman is in here. There's a bunch of Tony La Russa. They're all saying that the game just isn't as interesting because everybody's swinging for the fences on every single pitch, every single at bat. And so you have a lot less action, and which is bad for baseball. And that I kind of agree with. The other part of this is that the pitching, now that, they're letting these pitchers use substances, like before, if you ever saw a pitcher touch his hat before he pitched, he's not just doing that as like some weird OCD, this is my process. He was getting, what's that? The name of the stuff is escaping me. Pine tar.
Yep.
on his hand. That's what he was doing. It was illegal, but everybody did it. It was sort of an open secret. It's kind of like, a pro basketball player is going to cheat on his wife, news at 11. That's what it was. Now that's legal. And so what it's doing, it's giving the pitchers a better grip, and that's why you see the spin rate go up so much, because if they're gripping the ball better, they can spin it better, and so it's much harder to hit. And so part of what the article is saying here is, instead of figuring out how to counter that and how to hit those pitches and studying the pitchers, these batters are focused on data and data alone and trying to hit home runs, and that's ultimately bad for the game. And that's the point of Kirchin's column and what La Russa's saying badly. He didn't say much positive, I think. But that's the point, and I don't disagree with him to an extent. I mean, personally, I like seeing good pitching, but home run after home run after home run after home run with no action would turn off the younger generation of fans, and that's what they're saying, and they're not wrong.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely kind of blows up some of the traditional old school, new school debates here, which La Russa, waded into with his own thing in a real ham-handed way. And I'm amazed. It just, okay, exit stage
Why
left.
is anybody listening to Tony La Russa? I don't understand. Yeah.
Why is anyone hiring him to be their manager at this point?
Right.
So but it is different than that. These stories kind of like butt up against each other, but I think you're right. They're different narratives. And what I find super fascinating here is that it's actually, we're debating the extremes, and what everyone misses is the middle, right? Which, could be a metaphor generally, but because you got the banger home run or the dominant pitcher, the sort of, the kind of A-B choice of that as a game is actually robbing the game of much of its drama. Situational hitting, runners on base paths, a 20 pitch duel between a batter and a pitcher. So it's actually, what's fascinating to me is it's, people assume, and mostly correctly over time, that the kind of the more flashy parts keep fans or make a game interesting or whatever. But we're actually arguing is that the dominant pitcher or the, back of the stadium home run, that is the only two options sort of in a game, is actually what is actually making the game incredibly boring. The sexier parts of the game, and in addition to them, are actually missing all of the nuance and drama that I think even mild baseball fans understand as part of its allure.
Yeah, because what's pretty exciting to see is 2 on, 1 out, bottom of the 7th.
Yeah.
And what's the batter going to do here? The batter's trying to put the ball in the gap to score some runs. Instead, what happens today is strikeout, inning over. And you do see a lot of that nowadays. You'll see a ton of players stranded on base nowadays. And the reason is everybody's trying to hit a home run. And so these are, yes, you shouldn't listen to Tony La Russa about anything except learning how to drink and drive properly, possibly. That's the only thing I think he can teach the world. But beyond that, it's not just old men, dreaming about the good old days. There's something to be said for making the game less entertaining, because like a pitcher like Clayton Kershaw, and yes, I'm a, biased Dodger fan here, but this guy has got a whole bunch of pitches in his arsenal. For example, he doesn't, in the old days, 20 years ago, it's fastball. Like Randy Johnson was going to throw 80 fastballs. And he was throwing it at 102 miles an hour or whatever, and nobody could hit it. Kershaw isn't going to throw that many fastballs. An article talks about this. He's going to throw he didn't throw a breaking ball, but he's going to throw sliders, curve balls, all sorts of things. Different types of fastballs. There's 2-seam, 4-seam. And so it's. And he's not the only one. He's probably the best of this generation for sure, but he's not the only pitcher like this. Today's pitchers are a lot better, and they have a lot more pitches in their arsenal. And so part of what their article, the Kirchin article, is they're citing players that are saying, look, instead of studying the data, study the pitcher. Figure out how to how do you hit Kershaw? Be ready for the curveball instead of just passing on it, waiting on the fastball so you can hit a home run. And so it's they're putting the onus on the hitters to counter what is going on with the pitchers and putting the ball in play more, making contact, getting on base, because that's more exciting for the fans. Then if you gotta have a guy on first, maybe he's still second, and then he's in scoring position. And if you hit a single up the gap, he can maybe score, and it's exciting for the fans to see. And so I think it's not just sort of a longing for the good old days and all of that. There's some of that, yes, but what they're really saying is they need to change their approach to hitting in order to counter the pitching and make the game more exciting. And the other thing, sorry, the last thing is they mentioned, which is something I hadn't seen. They mentioned that they're experimenting with moving the mound back in minor league baseball, and the point there is there's more reaction time, which gives hitters more of a chance to make contact. I don't know if they'd ever do that in the pros, but that was an interesting point.
Don Mattingly is a manager of the Florida Marlins. He said the game is sometimes borderline unwatchable. When you have a manager of a major league team, a staff,
an all-time great.
Yeah, basically a staff for the, saying that their product is unwatchable. That's a pretty big statement. This isn't Don Mattingly in the desk job at Major League Baseball Network having to fill time between innings or between games of their broadcast. This is a manager saying their product is borderline unwatchable. That seems a bit of a canary in a coal mine. And I think the other canary in the coal mine, which I think is what started to kick a lot of this stuff up, is that there's no sport as referential to its stats, its numbers, and its history than baseball, right? And what we're seeing is some of these numbers start to fall. So if you actually break down, the major league record, I think no hitters in a year is 7. I'd wager that's probably going to fall this year. There's all kinds of amounts of strike. I'm not a baseball stats nerd, but these articles break down like you're going to see a ton of these kind of records fall and see numbers that you just don't see, and nothing kind of motivates baseball to react more than when they see these historical numbers start to just get mowed down.
Yeah, you used to see maybe one no-hitter a year. And we had just last week, no hitters in consecutive nights.
Yeah.
And so yes, they're most likely gonna shatter the no hitter in a year record for sure. Mattingly, for those who don't know, longtime New York Yankee, one of the stars of a major, probably the biggest, most well-known franchise in baseball. He's not just, like you said, he's not just some guy. Don Mattingly's a major name in baseball, and the idea of him saying, yeah, the product is unwatchable. That's kind of like John Elway saying, yeah, the NFL is just unwatchable right now, which he hasn't said that. We're not quoting him, just making a point. What do you do about it? What Kirchen says is it's got to start with the youth, and you teach kids at a young age how to hit for contact and not just swing for the fences at all times. And I forget who they cite in here. They cite a little league manager, saying, hey, why are you trying to put the ball in the air when you can't hit the ball out of the park?
Yeah.
Why are you swinging for the fences when you can't touch the fences? You're too young for it. And so put the ball in play. And so that's it. It's just going to take a mindset shift. And at the risk of sounding like someone who's just shaking his fist at the wind, I think analytics is the other part of this has really ruined baseball. I'm not in favor of all of the extent to which analytics is used in baseball, because as the article says, you're spending so much time focusing on the numbers and the data for pitching. How about just getting up there and studying the pitcher and figuring out how to hit him? How about managers stop making decisions on pitching and fielding decisions on the basis of what the analytics taught you, and just focus on the game? I think analytics is actually ruining baseball. That's the other component to it. It's so over the top now that people are forgetting how to play baseball. You're getting a bunch of MIT, MBAs out there running baseball teams, and I don't think that's really good for anybody.
Analytics should be a tool, not the tool, and I think that's what's become the problem.
Yeah.
I saw a great montage of, I think it was on ESPN, I'm not sure, but actually I think it was on CBS, that just did a kind of a quick cut montage of these hitters, whether they hit the ball out of the stadium or they struck out, they end up on almost basically both knees. But definitely one. I mean, their swing is so torqued to either be boom or bust that they're basically on their butt by the time they're done the swing.
Well, yeah, a home run swing also has to do with bat angle. You're swinging to put the ball up. If you're swinging to put the ball in play, it's more of a flat swing. And so these batters all have home run swings all the time. Watch Jock Peterson. Jock Peterson does it. He doesn't know how to hit for contact. Former Dodger. Now I forget who he's with now, to be honest. But a lot of pitchers now, yeah, there's a lot of torque. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's worse. The bat angle is worse because you're trying to hit up constantly, and that's called a home run swing. Like, you can always tell. Like, when my kids are playing baseball and everything, you can always tell when the kid's using his home run swing and when he's trying to put the ball in play. There's a difference. And they cited bunting. Nobody bunts anymore except in the playoffs. And because of that, they don't really know how to bunt, and it always they can't do it well. So there's a lot of things that can be done. Yes, analytics is a tool. It shouldn't be running all of Major League Baseball, and that's definitely making the game worse. And I mean, I love baseball, but you have to attract the younger crowd, and having more action is the way to do it. And having the way to get more action is to get more people on base.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We're kind of learning that for the majority of baseball fans, or what makes baseball entertaining, is not a necessarily, and I'm saying this at a macro level. Of course, individual versions of this are exciting, but at a macro level, it's not 1-0 games, and it's not 15-3 games. It's 5-4 games. That's actually a good baseball game.
What's interesting about the World Series normally in playoffs is that the pitching and the hitters are so good that usually there aren't a ton of home runs, and you usually end up with 5-4 style games where there's a lot of strategy decisions to be made by the managers. There's fielding decisions to be made, and that's what gets people entertained. It's not, again, like my Dodgers just hit 1 billion balls out of the park last year, and that's kind of how they won. That's not nearly as entertaining to people, and I think that all these people that are screaming yes are just a bunch of old guys, a bunch older than Chris and I. But they actually have a point as to how to make the game entertaining again. So it's something that baseball should be concerned about. They are concerned about. But in terms of what to do about it, it sort of falls back less on the league as a whole and more on individual managers, coaches, and players, more than anything, to change how they're playing the game.
Yeah, no,
coaching the game.
It's super interesting. These sort of trends in baseball, especially over its long history. It really is fascinating how the game evolves and retracts and expands. I haven't watched as much baseball the last couple of years, but that part of the sport is always super fascinating, and just its longevity. You have how the sport just kind of evolves over time at small ways, but then start to have these broad impacts. I think is one of the neat things about baseball.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But speaking of problems on the baseball horizon, or what could damage the public's interest in the game, I think we have we have a labor contract that is going to need to be decided here, and it's a little bit of a signal from the Major League Baseball Players Association that they might be a little bit nervous. They may be starting to prepare and hedge against some kind of work stoppage, strike, lockout, combo, whatever, in that they have started to liquidate some assets to start to get, basically a rainy day fund for its players ready to go. Seems like a paltry one maybe at this point, but it's a strategic signal, I would say.
Yeah, the AP, this is from the AP. Ronald Blum, May 11th, 2021. MLB increases investments to $178 million ahead of bargaining. Now, if you go back in the Wayback Machine, the last MLB labor deal was only 5 years, I think. They didn't sign a 10-year labor deal, which is why now it's expiring here again. Now, remember, the Players Union is really mad currently at MLB because of the coronavirus negotiations last year. If you remember, obviously the season was short, and there were no fans in the stands for the most part, and so the baseball owners lost a huge amount of money, And so there was a big protracted dispute, which actually caused the season to be shorter, about how the split of revenue would occur, or what the split of revenue would be, rather. And at the end of the day, baseball sort of enforced their will. The baseball commissioner basically had the contractual authority to just arbitrarily decide. And the players resented that and still resent that to this day. And so this AP article is claiming that the union, Major League Baseball Players Association, increased its liquid assets by 19 million to 178.5 million in cash. And so what that is telling us is that they are trying to get ready to help their players in the event of a strike, so they can give grants or loans, or I don't know how they do it. But what the article's leading to, and Chris is saying, is that it's a precursor of possible labor strife on the horizon. Now, baseball's probably been hurt more than any other American sport with labor disputes in the past. The labor dispute, what was it, 94, 95? The one in the mid-90s.
Yeah, that wiped out the World Series.
Yeah, it destroyed the league for several seasons. And it took a long time. It really took the Barry Bonds, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa home run chase to really get the public interested in it again. And that was years later. And so I think baseball's probably terrified of that. And so that probably gives the union probably more leverage than they otherwise had. But in all sports labor disputes, the owners ultimately have more leverage because they can outspend the players. At the end of the day, the owners can survive, the players can't. And so the players usually have a short-term view of these labor disputes because they don't really care about the next generation. They care about the here and now and getting their money while they're still young. And so for the most part, the players always cave in these things. The union here is sending a signal out that they're trying to keep that from happening. Whether or not they succeed, I tend to doubt it, but we'll see. But that's sort of what this is implying.
Also, in the court of public opinion, which is huge when you rely on public dollars to fund your business, and the players, rightly or wrongly, I don't care where you fall on the, labor management. The players usually pay the price because you're talking about basically anonymous rich guys who can can slink back and, hide behind their brands, which people love, et cetera, uniform, not the name type of stuff. But the players become they get the ire because they're the face of these things. They're the ones not playing. They're the ones, asking for more money when they make more money than 99.7% of most American workforce, et cetera, et cetera. So they never win on that. Now they might win on some labor things, but they always come out the loser on that end.
Yeah, and part of the reason also is I think the American public sort of intrinsically accepts that billionaires are going to billionaire, and we know that, and they're not real people, and people just sort of accept it. But the athletes, you can put a face to the name. They're really just the jocks in your high school that made it, and people get really upset when those type of people do things that, in the view of the public, seem greedy. The public just sort of accepts it. Again, billionaires are going to billionaire and be greedy, and that's who they are, and that's okay, and you can kind of live with that. And yes, they are far more anonymous than whoever, Clayton Kershaw. He's a face everybody knows. The owner of the Dodgers could walk into McDonald's and nobody would know who he was. And so people just don't get as mad about it. And so, yes, I think the players normally lose, and it's not it seems across political boundaries, in terms of who would be pro-labor, pro-union, all of that. It's really just court of public opinion, irrespective of politics. And so the union always has a problem. But I think the bigger problem, really, again, is that the billionaires can afford this, and the players ultimately can't. The billionaires are going to be fine. The players need their paychecks.
And $170+ million rainy day fund right now.
Go far.
Sounds like a lot of money. It is, in fact, a lot of money. In that context, it's not a lot of money.
No, because you've got 30 teams with 40 players on the 40-man roster, and divide 178 million by 40 for people who have huge, enormous lifestyles. That's not going to go far, and they're not going to give out every dime either.
No. So,
And it's going to be loans, which some of these players can't pay back. It's not just going to be grants; they're probably going to be loans, and it's not much of a rainy day fund, even though it sounds like it is.
now we didn't pre-discuss this one, but since we're on baseball, I've got to throw one more story at you, Steve.
Go ahead.
Will you be buying Alex Rodriguez's Makeup for Men product line?
See, Chris knows the answer to this. He just wants to hear me riff on it. Obviously, no, to answer your question. There is not a bigger pretty boy out there than A-Rod, than A-Rod is. I think that's the stupidest product I've ever heard. And only A-Rod could do this with a straight face. He's up until recently was Mr. Lopez. First of all, I guess he's out of that relationship.
Yeah, he
now.
lost out to Ben Affleck.
Yeah. Ben Affleck, I think, has wormed his way back in to J-Lo's heart. I can't contemplate a product that I could possibly want less than Makeup for Men. I can't. I'm sitting here thinking, is there something that I would want to buy over Makeup for Men? And I'm not sure what that product is. It may be the very last thing on my list of ever contemplating spending a dime on.
Yeah, I laughed about this, and obviously it stirred up lots of funny comments. Washington Times sports columnist Tom Lavero tweeted that what better product to cover up your track marks from anabolic steroids, that kind of. So it opens up that whole line of joke.
What kind of egomaniac do you have to want to wear Makeup for Men? I mean, what kind of narcissistic personality would want to buy a product like that and multiply the narcissism by 1,000 to get to the person who would want to make that product?
And also, when you look like Alex Rodriguez, right? Like, makeup's not helping or hindering that. You know what I mean?
No.
So it's like some dumb schlub who does sort of buy into this. It's not turning you into Alex Rodriguez.
Alex Rodriguez could get any woman he wants with no makeup, and has in the past.
Right.
Many times done that. He's competing with Derek Jeter, for the most women, dated in New York City. And I'm not sure who has the crown. Yeah, I'm just at a loss for words at how dumb I think this idea is. Seriously. Should I get ethnic on us? Yes, I should. Here's who I think you're selling this to. A bunch of Italian Americans in Long Island. Isn't that who's going to buy this? The guys who are dressed in the really tight T-shirts with the gold chains. Isn't that kind of your market? Because who you're not marketing it to is the farm kid in Iowa. You're not marketing it to. I don't know who else you'd be marketing to, but a bunch of pretty boys from New York.
There definitely has been a trend over the last 15 or 20 years. Like, men getting manicures and pedicures is actually like a pretty standard thing. Men in tanning beds. So I could, I could see some trends that there has been and is a growing market in men's aid, men's beauty aids, or however you want to frame it. I do think that, especially, and there's all kinds of ways you could even think of alternatively marketing essentially the same product, but I think Makeup for Men, for almost most men, is a tough sell. You do better with bras for men, which in many cases might be useful. Well,
think about the Jersey Shore crowd. That's who I'm going for. That's the people you're selling Makeup for Men to, I think, and no one else.
And it might be a step too far for them too.
Maybe, yeah, it might be. It's It's something like if A-Rod got pitched this on Shark Tank, I think Shark Tank would laugh this product out of the water. You'd have to think.
Yeah, no, I say this every time I talk about A-Rod. I'm just still amazed that A-Rod is in our life to the degree that he is.
He's a joke, okay? Here's the thing. He's a pretty face. He's charismatic. He's fairly well spoken. But that doesn't mean he has a operational brain cell in his head. And yes, people forget, and what Chris is alluding to is this man got in more trouble for steroids than like any other player in baseball history, basically. And got run out of the New York Yankees for it, basically. And somehow he's completely rehabbed his image. Now, what he is a pretty good baseball analyst. He does do well. When he's on the playoff broadcasts and stuff, he's outstanding at that. I give him credit for that. But no, I don't really quite understand why all of a sudden he's turned his image around. I don't know how that happens. Like all of a sudden, A-Rod was back for no real reason.
I mean, most baseball people don't even want to admit that Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds exist, let alone...
And some of the guy who was far worse is back.
Yeah.
I don't quite get it.
It's crazy.
And it's like, see, part of it is it's so much about image. This is a good marketing lesson for you guys out here. Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens are surly, grouchy, unlikable curmudgeons for the most part, and throw in a healthy dose of narcissism for Bonds. A-Rod is certainly a narcissist, but he's very charismatic and well-spoken. He's not rude. He doesn't look down on people. I mean, he may, but he doesn't project that image at all. And so when you have charisma and you have a personality that's more inviting and welcoming, that opens up much more opportunities. Whereas you just act like a complete ass like Clemens and Bonds did and still do to this day.
No, there's definitely a Teflon aspect to A-Rod that goes all the way back to his exit from the Mariners. He seems to survive things that would have destroyed the reputations of many, many players.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's because he's just a charismatic, good-looking dude. That gets you far.
Well,
it gets you into things like makeup for men.
Oh, it cracks me up. And did you see the promo stills of him like in front of a mirror dabbing on bass or whatever? I mean, they're hysterical.
Yeah, it's just crazy. It's the stupidest product I've ever heard of, really. This is going to be the best gag gift of all time. There's this market right there. Christmas and office going away gag gifts.
That's actually a great point, yeah. But, maybe this means we'll get the John Kruk male brassiere.
Because that's almost, I'm trying to think of what would be worse to do. What product would be worse to use? And I really don't know. You could maybe hide the brassiere better than the makeup, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
If you wore a thick enough shirt, you might not be able to tell. And so I guess if you had to pick one, the male brassiere might be a less embarrassing, shameful thing to do.
Yeah, for sure. No, I definitely think it would be more successful. All right, so I think we're done. I think we're done on makeup and men and bras for men. That might be a good coda for this week's episode. So I imagine the Hogsty is going into kind of its quietest little stretch, but what's going on?
We're definitely heading into the quiet season. The quiet season for the NFL is always June. And we're about to hit June. The draft is over. Free agency's over. OTAs will be over soon. So, yes. By the way, I shamed myself by virtue of our last show, Chris, into doing the first film study of the year, which was Jarrett Patterson, so you can read that. The Hogsties, we're doing one show a week right now. Rick Snyder's Seasons of Discontent is doing two 15-minute shows a week. He would like you to go watch it on YouTube. On YouTube, because it's on YouTube now. But we're getting ready, trying to ramp up for training camp.
Just around the corner, strangely enough.
Yep. Although it hasn't been announced yet, by the way. The plans for training camp haven't been announced.
Right. Is it Ashburn or Richmond or whatever?
It's going to be Ashburn for sure. It's not going to be Richmond, but the dates and stuff are still unknown.
Go back to Carlisle, I say. Wow, we are old.
You said it, not me.
All right, well, we will see you in 2 weeks.